Okay, so today I'm going to touch on a very interesting subject. This is a subject that everyone, I believe almost everyone knows about. I'm going to be talking about Eden today, the Garden of Eden. The story is pretty straightforward. God made Adam, then he made Eve out of Adam, and then he gave instructions. Of course, he gave instructions to Adam saying, you can eat of any fruit in the garden, but do not eat of the tree of, what do you call that again? Good and evil, something. Yeah, do not eat of that tree. Yeah. And of course, we know, fast forward, Adam and Eve disobeyed. Eve convinced Adam to eat of the fruit after being convinced by the serpent and whatnot. And yeah, that's how the sin nature was inherited in them. And, God banished them from the garden, blah, 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 blah. We know that stuff. But I think when you look at Eden, that whole story, and you can read it from Genesis chapter 2 and chapter 3. I think that's why the Bible really touches a lot on the Garden of Eden and how God dealt with them and the punishments and whatnot. There's a lot to look at. It might seem like a simple story, but it's actually really deep, because every verse has 70 times 7 revelation. So you might think you know the story very well, but when you go back and read it, God can give you deeper revelation. So, one thing that fascinates me rather, what would have happened if only one person ate of the fruit? If it was just Eve who ate of the fruit, and she eventually, of course, she goes to Adam, no, eat of the fruit, and Adam says no. What would have happened to Eve? Or what if Adam is the one who ate of the fruit and Eve did not eat of the fruit? What would have happened then? So it's fascinating because initially I thought if it was just Eve who ate of the fruit and Adam did not eat of the fruit, I thought maybe God would have banished Eve, and left Adam in the garden. Maybe God would have made another woman to help Adam in the garden, and maybe God would have banished Eve to go out into the world until she dies out. That was my thinking on the situation. Until I spoke to a certain friend of mine, engineer Chomba Tresha. I explained to her about this episode. I said I want to make an episode on Eden and whatnot. So what's your take on it? And she touched on something that I completely missed. She talked about the instruction to not eat of the fruit was given to Adam and not Eve. And I completely missed that. And she said, if Eve is the only one who ate of the fruit and Adam refused, nothing would have happened. But it was only when Adam ate of the fruit, that's when now their minds were opened and they knew right from wrong and they realized they were naked. So it's just really fascinating, to see how God would have actually dealt with that situation. We already know how the story went, but it's just interesting to get into the mind of God. How would God have dealt with this? And another thing that fascinates me is the aspect of our sexual desire, sexual appetite. Initially, if you read Genesis 2, it talks about how, Adam was on his own and Adam was put in charge of wild animals, and he was responsible for naming them and what, yada, yada, yada. And before that, I think God, if I'm not mistaken, God created animals, to keep Adam company. I hope I'm right with this. I have to go back to the scriptures again. But he, at some point before he created Eve, he created the animals. But it's like it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for Adam. And so God put Adam into a deep sleep. And of course, we know the story. He used one of his ribs and pulled out a woman who Adam named, by the way. So if Adam was not if Adam was content with the animals just there, just him and the animals and doing his work and whatnot, there would have been no need for him to have any type of sexual desire. There would have been no need for him to have sex, because sex is meant for us to, reproduce, replenish the earth. And of course, it's also meant for intimacy and for enjoyment. So I'd like to think, in fact, this is a new idea, because did Adam initially, I don't know if God gave Adam genitalia, and I don't know if God gave the animals that he created genitalia as well. I don't know if the animals were going to die out eventually, or it was only after they sinned that was going to happen. So it's really fascinating, when you sit down and think about it. So I believe the issue of sexual appetite, it only came after Eve was brought into the picture. I think that's when God was now thinking of children, generations, and whatnot. But initially, if Adam was going to be content with the animals, I don't think that was going to happen. Either they would have just saved it for the animals, or I don't know. It's just really fascinating. Another thing that really interests me is just how God created everything. How God created, if you go even before the story of Adam and Eve, it shows you the number of days God took to create the earth, the water. He said the earth was formless, there was darkness, and he brought in light, he brought in water, vegetation, animals, and all that stuff. Sometimes when I look at God, right, I always see God to be, he's a great God. He is a great God, and he's mighty, and he can do anything. It fascinates me how he took his time, because he's God. He doesn't think as slow as we think. His mind and his thinking is just far beyond us. So it just fascinated me that God literally took his time forming the earth. I'm going to introduce this, I'm going to introduce that. And on the seventh day, he rested. God rested. Like that's really fascinating, when you think about it. Because sometimes we have this perception of God, just in a snap of a finger, God can do this. And I believe he can. But I think it's just fascinating that he actually took his time to build the earth and, to form it the way he was supposed to form it. And, when you also look at the issue of, animals and whatnot, do you see how I believe God was monitoring Adam? And with time, he realized to say, no, animals are not going to cut it. And so that's when he put him in a deep sleep, and that's when he created woman. So I think that's very, very, very interesting. It gives you a lot of insight into who God is. And of course, you can't know God in his entirety. But of course, when you read the Bible, you get to know a part of him, because there's no one who can know God fully. You can only know him in parts. Sometimes God can reveal himself to this person. He reveals another side of himself to another person, and it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. And the other thing is, when you look at the issue of good and evil, right? One thing that really fascinates me is that, is it that if Adam and Eve did not eat of the fruit, is it that we were going to do evil and not know it? Or we're already in a perfect state? And if we were in a perfect state, why is it that Adam was able to make such a mistake? Adam and Eve were able to make such a mistake. They were in the most perfect place, and you think God made them perfect. But why did they make such a mistake? So for me personally, I believe sometimes we forget the aspect of free will. If you look at Lucifer was created by God. He was the music angel, if I'm not mistaken. And I know God created him to be perfect. I know God did not create Satan to be Satan. And that's not what God had in mind, to say, when I create this angel, he's going to be Satan and he's going to terrorize my children and whatnot. So in as much as God creates perfection, we still have free will. He may have created us, initially, he may have created us to be perfect, to be sinless and all this stuff, but we have free will. We still get to choose. Remember, Lucifer was in heaven. He still got to choose. No. He got proud, he got arrogant, and he made his own decision to go against God. He made his own decision to rebel. So that's really fascinating, that in as much as God made Adam, God made Eve, he made them perfect, he gave them everything they needed, they still had free will. Because if you don't have free will, then you're not making your own choices. It's like God is forcing you. It's like you're a robot. That's why even us here on earth, we all have free will. God can give you everything, he can do everything for you, but you have free will. You get to choose if you want to love him or not, because God desires a relationship with us, and you can't have a relationship with someone who you're controlling. This person is just a robot. Do this, yes. Do that, okay. Do this, yes, okay. No, yes sir, okay, all right, cool. That's not really a relationship. So God has given everyone free will, and that's just an angle that really fascinates me so much. It really fascinates me. And the concept of evil as well, it's just really fascinating. Another thing, before I even get to that, one thing I also think about is, how did the serpent get into Eden? Or how did Satan possess? I don't know if it was Satan who possessed a snake or he just came as a snake. But I always wonder as well, to say, how did that actually happen? Why did God allow it? Or how was he able to enter in such a place filled with glory, such a beautiful, amazing place, which is protected, or which was rather protected by God, and it had God's fingerprint on it and whatnot? You wouldn't think Satan would infiltrate such a place. So it makes you wonder, like, how did the snake go there? How was it able to convince Eve and whatnot? And why did it go to Eve to begin with? Why did it not go to Adam, the leader? Why did he have to go to the helper first of all, to convince her, who eventually was going to convince the leader of the garden, the leader of the two, to actually give in? So I think that's really fascinating when you actually think about it. And that's why I believe when I say it should be in 1 Timothy 3:16, if I'm not mistaken, says all scripture is inspired by God, and you can use it for correction, rebuke, reproof, ABCD. So all scripture. There's no, even those same scriptures where you say, this is the son of this one is the son of this one begot so. There is something to extract from there. You may not see it now, maybe in the situation you're in, but there is always something to learn. So this issue of like Eden is very fascinating. If you just sit down and get the concept behind that, it's really interesting. And another thing to point out is that Adam and Eve had the ability to say no. God gives everyone ability. In as much as, of course, they were perfect and they were tempted and all that, you can always say no. In as much as that tree was appealing, when they realized, once I eat from this fruit, I'll know everything. I think the Bible, there's a point where it says, no, once you eat the fruit, you will be like God himself. So it's really interesting. It's really interesting. When you look at it from that angle, because they had the power to resist. They would have said, no, I don't want. God told me this. The God who made us actually told us that we should not eat of the fruit. so I'm not going to eat of the fruit. And another thing is, they should have been able to discern when it's God speaking, if it was God speaking or if it was Satan speaking. Because when you look at, God has a presence to him. There's a warmth, there's a beauty, there's a way he speaks to you. There's just a warmth that you feel when he's speaking to you. And this is God speaking. So even when you feel that presence, even Eden, it's just such presence that was there. You know this is inspired by God. But then when the snake came in, even the way the snake was speaking, you would have, there's an issue of discernment. You would know, this is not how God would speak to me. That's number one. This is not something God would want. This doesn't seem like it has God's approval on it. So I think we can also apply that to our lives. I can give an example of my childhood. So growing up, I have the most amazing parents. They set a very good example for me growing up. And, even growing up, would listen to like gospel music. They lived, you could see even the way my mom and dad lived, like they were good to everyone. They would pray every day. They would read the Bible. And they just set a good atmosphere, a godly atmosphere in the home, such that they didn't even need to tell us, drinking is bad, smoking is bad, don't do this, don't have sex before marriage, ABCD. Just the general atmosphere we had in the home. It already what's the right thing. Okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. I've grown up living like this. It means this is where I'm supposed to be. This is how life should be. So even when you go out, like for me, even when I would go to boarding school, I would see people drinking and smoking. I would always revert back to my upbringing. How was I raised? This doesn't align with what I was taught, This doesn't align with that atmosphere, that godly atmosphere. Without someone lecturing me to say, when you drink, this happens. When you have sex, there are soul ties, A, B, C, D. You would know, just from the way you've grown up, you would know. Say, this doesn't align with what I know. This doesn't align with the God that I've come to believe. This doesn't align with everything that I believe. This, it's really, once you know where you're supposed to be, and once you've been on the right path, you're able to differentiate. You're able to know this is wrong, this is right, because you already had a taste of it. So Adam and Eve had a taste of God. They heard God speak. God made them. God put them in the Garden of Eden, which was beautiful. Of course, I wasn't there, but it was beautiful. Obviously, the Bible describes it as beautiful. So just knowing that, just seeing God, experiencing God, knowing his power, knowing what he can do. They had the power, they had the knowledge, they were in a position where they were able to discern, say, this is not good. But at the end of the day, like I said before, we have free will. We get to choose what we want. And, God won't force you. That's the one way you can have a proper, genuine relationship with you. That's why he gave you free will. He wants you to seek him genuinely, wholeheartedly. Not because he's threatening you, not because he's forcing you. He gives everyone free will. He gives everyone choice, and every choice we make has consequences. Yeah, so that's something to look at, something to draw just from the issue of Adam and Eve. And, the issue of evil is also really fascinating to me. It's also really fascinating. I feel like evil... how can I put this? Okay, if you look at Adam, look at Eve, look at Lucifer himself and all the angels who rebelled against God. Their actions are what introduced evil. Lucifer was perfect. Lucifer was good. But because he went against God, he introduced evil. He became evil by disobeying God, by disobeying the set orders and the principles that God laid out for him. So when you look at Adam and Eve, it's the same thing. They had a perfect life. They were happy. They had animals. They were at peace. But as soon as they went against God, they introduced evil in their lives. So evil, I think one of the main aspects of evil, for there to be evil, there has to be good. So when you go against good, and what is good is defined by God. If God says something is good, then it's good. If God was to say sex before marriage was good, it would have been good for us. We would have been sleeping around and there would have been no consequence. But because God says sex before marriage is a sin, having children out of wedlock is a sin, it means you're introducing evil, you're introducing sin into your heart. So evil, essentially, when you look at all these stories, you can see that evil is anything that diverts from God. Anything that does not align with God's will is evil. And even when Adam and Eve went against God, it was evil. They introduced sin. And even up to now, the whole, the entire humanity for like decades, centuries, millennia, if anything. No, centuries, actually, centuries. You see that up to now, we're still suffering in a way. Of course, God sent his son and died for us and we have grace and whatnot, but up to now, because of that one mistake, we're still suffering. We've lost dominion even over animals. Before that, we had dominion over animals. It's just that now, like I said before, we just have the grace of God, and God is still with us, and we've been reconciled to the Father. So that's amazing. That's good. That's wonderful. But this is not even how we're supposed to be. Jesus coming down here to die for our sins, that was a plan B. That wasn't God's initial plan. And when you look at the fruit, right, it fascinates me because God, there's also something to learn from this, because God literally said you can eat from any other tree. When you say any other tree, you can literally eat from not just any, but every other tree that's there. Every other tree, except that one. And I know some people might question to say like, why did he put that tree in the first place? Sometimes you don't have to question God. He has his reasons why. And he already gave you an order. Because he gave you an order, don't eat of that tree. It shouldn't even matter in the first place. But what fascinates me is that God gave them so many alternatives. But they just wanted that one tree. Why can't we eat of that one? And even after Satan convinced them, why can't you eat of that one? So it amazes me because there's always a way out. That teaches me there's always a way out. And it also shows me that there's an alternative. There's a right way. Just because you can't do something, there's always something else. Like even in music. For me, one thing that used to bother me, I was like, when I think that was like 2017, December, 31st December, I decided to stop listening to secular music. So I used to wonder, like, am I going to find any music that I enjoy? Because if you look at the gospel music, it's usually boring, there isn't much creativity, it's always that choir stuff. I wasn't really into Hillsong. I had very unique genres. I liked rock, R&B, indie, that type of stuff, EDM, and I didn't really like that type of music within the Christian circle, within the Christian sector. So I was like, how am I going to enjoy this music? But the thing is, even as I tried to look for the kind of music I liked in the Christian circles, I found music. I was just limiting myself. I actually found some good rap music. I found some good rock music. So there was an alternative for me. You get it? There was always an alternative. Even if I was complaining to say, am I going to find any music that I enjoy, Am I going to find these genres in the Christian sector? Are they going to be as artistic, as creative as the guys in the secular world? But there's always an alternative. Even music, you can quit secular music. There's really good music in the, and I don't know why I'm saying this, there's really good music even in the Christian industry. And you find, I like rap music, you'll find rap music. You could even 116, Rich Records, these guys, you'll find them. Movies, you'll find some movies there. You'll find series, there's always an alternative. What matters is you stay on the path that God has laid out for you. So in the same way, God gave them an alternative. Just because he said, no, don't eat from the tree. He knew there are millions of other trees there. Okay, I don't know if there were millions, but there are other trees there that they could have been getting fruit from and enjoying and all that. And it would have satisfied them. But they just wanted that one tree, And they fell for the temptation, and it had crazy consequences to this day. So that's just something that's really fascinating. And also, I think I'll end with this. What would have happened if Adam and Eve did not eat of the fruit entirely? Satan tempts them and they said, no, I'm not going to eat of this fruit. What would have happened? How would life have been? How long would we have lived? What was God's intended purpose if we actually lived in this perfect world? What would have happened? Because over the years, you can see that ever since Adam and Eve committed that sin, even the number of years we get to live here, have you noticed that it has been deteriorating, right? There's a point people would live 1,000 years, 900 years, 696 years, 500 years. But now people can only go up to 100, 120, 110, 128, 90. So clearly this world that God created is deteriorating. It's deteriorating. And I think Pastor Daniel Kaira of Household of Faith Church preached on something like that. He said if you're to see the way God initially created certain creatures, even just fish, the same fish that we enjoy eating, if you saw the way it was looking centuries ago, you would be amazed. Maybe it was much bigger than they are now. If you look at these animals, like they would have, maybe lions and giraffes, maybe they were much bigger, much healthier when he created them in the past. But because of the sin that was brought into the world, like the earth is in a constant deterioration state. It's deteriorating each and every day. So had Adam and Eve actually stuck to the goal, it would have been really interesting. I wonder how things would have been. I think we would have been way advanced than we are right now. I think people would have been living long. We would have been very much at peace. Most likely we would all have been naked, unaware and ashamed. We would be happy, would have been willfully praising God and whatnot. And another fascinating thing, even if Adam and Eve did not eat of the fruit, maybe eventually we were going to have children who were going to do the same, or eventually someone from their bloodline was going to eat the fruit. So I don't know what would have happened if maybe God would have struck them down. Because again, remember, the instruction was given to Adam. So if anyone else ate of the fruit, most likely they would have been struck down. Or God would have done whatever he needed to do. That's my topic for today. I hope you've been blessed by it. And watch out for episode 3.